Welcome back to the Pitwall Pod, the show where Formula One meets full throttle debate. Today we're diving into the chaos, strategy and speed of the 2026 Canadian Grand Prix, from the legendary circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal. From dramatic overtakes to weather, curveballs and championship implications, we're breaking down everything that went down in one of the wildest weekends of the season. Strap in, because this race had absolutely everything. Alright, let's get into free practice 1 from the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, and the headline is simple. Mercedes came to Montreal loaded with upgrades and they absolutely delivered. It was sensation Kimi Antonelli topping the session with a 1:13.402, just ahead of teammate George Russell, as Mercedes locked out the top 2 in a chaotic red flag-filled session at the iconic circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Now, remember, this is a sprint weekend, so teams only had 1 hour of practice before qualifying. Every lap mattered, and Mercedes looked dilated in immediately. Antonelli, who already leads Russell by 20 points in the championship, looked unbelievable comfortable with the new package, calm, quick and honestly, championship level composed. The session itself was messy from the start. Franco Colapinto had throttle issues almost instantly for Alpine, while Liam Lawson brought out the first red flag after stopping his Racing Bull's car on track with a mechanical problem. Grip levels were terrible early on. Drivers were skating across curbs, missing chicanes and finding grass everywhere. Lando Norris overshot the final chicane, Max Verstappen dipped wheels into grass multiple times, and even Antonelli had a deep moment into turn 1. Then came one of the strangest incidents of the session. Alexander Albon hit a groundhog exiting turn 7, causing serious damage to the Williams and triggering another red flag only in Canada. As the track improved, Mercedes really turned up the pace. Russell fired in a strong lap on the softs, but Antonelli answered immediately with the session's benchmark. That upgraded package clearly works. Behind them, Lewis Hamilton put Ferrari third ahead of Charles Leclerc and Verstappen. McLaren looked competitive but scrappy, with both Norris and Oscar struggling to keep it tidy on a dirty circuit. And just when things were calming down, boom, another red flag. Esteban Ocon spun and slammed nose first into the barriers in the Haas, ending the session in dramatic fashion. So after FP1, the big takeaway is this. Mercedes might officially be back at the front, Antonelli looks fast, Russell looks confident, and with sprint qualifying coming up next, the Silver Arrows suddenly look like the team everyone has to beat in Montreal. Alright, sprint qualifying in Montreal has absolutely mayhem from the very beginning. SQ1 started with immediate pressure because teams only had that one disrupted practice session to prepare. Right away, Lewis Hamilton looked sharp for Ferrari, becoming the first driver into the 1:13s and setting the early benchmark. Mercedes still looked seriously quick though, with Kimi Antonelli continuing his strong FP1 form. McLaren were right there too, while Max Verstappen had a few messy moments cutting chicanes, but then the session flipped completely. Fernando Alonso locked up into turn 3 and slammed into the barriers, bringing out a red flag. With less than 2 minutes left, suddenly everyone had to bottom off. The timing sheet was in panic mode trying to make it back out. And because the restart came so late, most drivers didn't even reach the line in time for a final lap. That moment shocked eliminations for Sergio Perez, Pierre Gasly, Valtteri Bottas and Lance Stroll. And remember, Alexander Albon and Liam Lawson never even started the session because of damage and mechanical issues from FP1. Absolutely disaster for several teams before sprint qualifying had barely even begun. SQ2 is where Mercedes really started flexing. George Russell came out aggressive immediately and laid down a monster lap, while Antonelli stayed right with him. The silver arrows just looked planted through every sector at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Meanwhile, Verstappen was suddenly in trouble. The Red Bull driver had a lap deleted for track limits and found himself hovering around the elimination zone with only minutes left. For a moment, it genuinely looked like he might get knocked out before SQ3. He barely survived in ninth. Behind him, the pressure ramped up for the midfield teams. Carlos Sainz squeezed through into the top 10 shootout at the last second, while both Audis narrowly missed out despite another impressive showing from Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto. Eliminated in SQ2, Hülkenberg, Bortoleto, Colapinto, Ocon, Behrman and Alonso, who couldn't continue after that earlier crash. And then came the final showdown. Soft tires on, 8 minutes left, one shot at sprint pole. Russell wasted absolutely no time. The Mercedes driver threw down a stunning opening lap, then somehow found even more pace on the final run, a 1:12.965, becoming the only driver into the 1:12 seconds all session. Antonelli pushed hard but came up just 600 seconds short, sealing a Mercedes front row lockout. That's massive. After all the development questions earlier this season, Mercedes suddenly looked like the fastest car in Montreal. Lando Norris took third from McLaren, ahead of teammate Oscar Piastri, with Ferrari locked out row 3 with Hamilton and Leclerc. Verstappen could only manage seventh, with a huge surprise considering Red Bull's usual dominance at power-sensitive circuits. And one of the standing stories, rookie Arvid Lindblad, putting the Racing Bull car 9th in SQ3. Seriously impressive performance under pressure. After qualifying, Russell sounded fired up, saying Miami never shook his confidence and calling Montreal a proper Formula 1 circuit. Based on that lap, yeah, he backed it up. Sprint race, Mercedes teammates go to war. Now this is where the Canadian Grand Prix weekend exploded into life. The sprint race gave us the first real on-track fight between the Mercedes teammates this season, and it got tense fast. George Russell started from pole alongside championship leader and teammate Kimi Antonelli, and for once Mercedes actually survived the opening lap cleanly. No drama into turn 1, no position swap, just Russell leading Antonelli away while the McLarens chased behind. But it didn't stay calm for long. Antonelli looked hungry from the beginning. The 19-year-old sat right on Russell's gearbox, lap after lap, clearly believing he had the pace to take the win around Gilles Villeneuve circuit. And then came lap 5. Antonelli launched an attack into turn 2. Russell defended aggressively. The two Mercedes banged wheels and Antonelli got forced onto the grass. The Italian immediately exploded on team radio, calling Russell's move very naughty and demanding a penalty. Meanwhile, the chaos opened the door for Lando Norris to sneak through into second place for McLaren. That's when Mercedes boss Toto Wolff delivered one of the quotes of the weekend over the radio. Concentrate on the driving, please, and not on the radio mowing. Ice cold. The contact clearly rattled Antonelli for a few laps. He dropped back, started making mistakes, and suddenly had Lewis Hamilton breathing down his neck. Instead of fighting Russell for the lead, up front though, Russell had another problem, Norris. The McLaren driver stayed glued to the Mercedes all race long, never more than a second or so behind, waiting for one opportunity that never quite came. And honestly, Russell drove brilliantly under pressure. Traffic made things complicated late in the sprint, especially when the leaders caught slower cars, but Russell stayed calm and controlled the race perfectly to take the win by just over a second. Norris finished second after another super consistent McLaren performance, with Antonelli recovered enough to hold on to third despite several more off-track moments. Behind them, McLaren quietly had a fantastic sprint overall, with Oscar Piastri taking fourth. Ferrari's race was more frustrating. Hamilton looked strong earlier, but contact with the famous Wall of Champions, while defending from Piastri, cost him momentum, and he eventually fell behind teammate Charles Leclerc as well. Further back, Max Verstappen never really had pace to fight the front group and finished seventh, while rookie Arvid Lindblad grabbed the final sprint point in 8th for Racing Bulls. But the main story leaving Saturday morning was obvious. Mercedes are fast, Russell is fighting back, and Antonelli versus Russell is officially becoming a real title rivalry inside the same garage. After all the sprint drama earlier in the day, attention shifted to full Grand Prix qualifying, and once again Mercedes looked terrifyingly fast. Q1 started with immediate chaos before anyone even set a proper lap. Fernando Alonso was investigated for an unsafe release after nearly colliding with Franco Colapinto in the pit lane, setting the tone for a really scrappy opening session. On track, the grip kept improving rapidly, and the timing screens were changing every few seconds. Lando Norris initially led the way for McLaren, then George Russell dipped into the 113s, but then championship leader Kimi Antonelli answered with a monster lap of a 113.380 to go fastest in Q1. Meanwhile, several drivers were struggling badly with track limits and grip. Charles Leclerc missed the final chicane, both Audis flirted with elimination, and the session ended with some massive names dropping out. Eliminated in Q1, Esteban Ocon, Alexander Albon, Fernando Alonso, Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll, and Valtteri Bottas. Perez especially had a nightmare session, including an incident where he blocked Alonso on a flying lap. The Cadillac driver ended qualifying dead last among the runners, with investigations still hanging over him. Q2 might be the biggest surprise of the entire weekend. Everyone expected Mercedes or McLaren to dominate again, but suddenly Isaac Hadjar lit up the timing screens for Red Bull. He absolutely nailed his lap and became the first driver all weekend to break into the 112 during Q2 with a stunning 112.975. That lap stunned the paddock. Lewis Hamilton was just behind for Ferrari, while Antonelli, Russell, Norris and Piastri all safely progressed into the final shootouts. Russell actually looked vulnerable for a while here. He complained about the balance, ran wide at turn 1, and at one stage was nearly 6/10 slower than Antonelli. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen kept struggling with the Red Bull, complaining he couldn't get the front tires working properly. And once again, heartbreak for Nico Hülkenberg. The Audi driver missed Q3 by 1 position yet again, qualifying 11th for another race weekend despite looking quick all session long. Eliminated in Q2, Nico Hülkenberg, Liam Lawson, Gabriel Bortoleto, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz and Oliver Bearman. Q3 looked like it belonged to Antonelli, and then George Russell delivered one of the laps of the season. The final session started horrible for Russell. He aborted his opening lap after a snap of oversteer and looked completely out of rhythm, while Antonelli and Norris traded fastest sectors. At that moment, pole seemed gone. Mercedes sends Russell out earlier than everyone else for the final runs, and it turns out to be a genius strategy. He banked 1 lap, cooled the tires, then absolutely unleashed everything on the final attempt. A 112.578 pole position out of nowhere. Russell beat Antonelli by just 600 of a second as Mercedes looked out the front row for Sunday's Canadian Grand Prix. And honestly, the atmosphere inside that Mercedes garage must be incredible right now, because this rivalry is heating up fast. Antonelli had been quicker for most of qualifying, but Russell delivered when it mattered most. Behind them, Norris third ahead of Piastri, and McLaren continued their super consistent weekend. Hamilton ended up fifth after running onto the grass during the final lap, while Verstappen could only manage sixth after repeatedly complaining about Red Bull's straight line speed deficit. And another massive result for rookies. Hadjar qualifying 7th, Arvid Lindblad for Racing Bulls in 9th, and Colapinto snuck Alpine into the top 10. But the headline is simple. Mercedes have fully arrived in Montreal, and George Russell just stole pole position at the very last possible second. Sunday's Canadian Grand Prix had everything before the race even properly started. Rain clouds hovered over Circuit Gilles Villeneuve after all afternoon. Teams were gambling on tire strategy, and the grid was completely split on what conditions were actually coming. Then totally chaos before lights out. Arvid Lindblad stalled on the grid with a clutch issue, forcing an extra formation lap and immediately throwing strategy calculations into confusion. And the tire choices were fascinating. McLaren gambled on intermediates for both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, while Mercedes stuck with slicks alongside most of the front runners. When the lights finally went out, Norris absolutely launched. The McLaren rocket from third into the lead into turn 1, jumping both Mercedes instantly. But almost immediately, McLaren realized they made the wrong tire call. Piastri boxed at the end of lap 1, Norris followed a lap later, and just like that, McLaren's race completely unraveled. Once the strategy chaos settled down, the race became all about one thing: Mercedes versus Mercedes. George Russell and Kimi Antonelli spent nearly 30 laps fighting flat out for the lead, and honestly, it was one of the best on-track battles we've seen all season. Russell looked aggressive early and eventually muscled past Antonelli into the final chicane. Antonelli immediately looked up, trying to fight back, and flat spotted his tires, but the teenager refused to back down. Every few laps, the lead changed again. Russell would make a mistake, Antonelli would attack, then Russell would immediately counter. At one point, Antonelli forced his way past into the final corner, only to lock up 2 laps later while lapping Norris, handing the lead straight back. And then came the biggest controversy of the race. Antonelli attacked again, ran wide while fighting Russell, rejoined still ahead, and Mercedes ordered him to give the position back. The Italian was furious on team radio. "Why, mate? He pushed me off and I was already ahead." But he obeyed the order. The stewards eventually decided no further investigation was needed, but the tension between those two drivers is now impossible to ignore. This is just teammates racing anymore. This is a championship fight. Then Russell's heartbreak changed everything, and just when it looked like the Mercedes battle was heading toward an all-time finish, disaster. Lap 30, George Russell suddenly slowed down with a power unit failure while leading the Canadian Grand Prix. The Brit jumped out of the car furious, punching the cockpit in frustration, and his race ended on the side of the track. Honestly, you could feel the heartbreak. Russell had been brilliant all weekend, sprint pole, sprint win, Grand Prix pole, and he was in the middle of an incredible fight for victory before reliability destroyed it. The retirement completely changed the race. The virtual safety car came out, most teams pitted, and Antonelli inherited a comfortable lead over Max Verstappen. Antonelli takes control while McLaren collapsed. From 3 there, Antonelli never looked back. The Mercedes driver controlled the restart perfectly and stretched the gap lap after lap to seal his 4th consecutive victory and extend his championship lead to 43 points. At just 19 years old, Antonelli steadily looks unstoppable. Behind him, though, the fight for the podium got intense. Lewis Hamilton came alive late in the race for Ferrari, hunting down Verstappen in the closing laps before pulling off a brilliant move around the outside into turn 1 to steal 2nd place. That gave us a podium of Antonelli, Hamilton and Verstappen. 3 completely different eras of Formula 1 sharing the top 3. Ferrari also had a strong recovery with Charles Leclerc finishing 4th, while Hadjar somehow survived both a 10-second penalty and a stop-and-go penalty to still finish 5th for Red Bull. Meanwhile, McLaren's day completely collapsed. Piastri received a penalty for hitting Alexander Albon. Norris suffered a gearbox issue and retired. And both drivers ended the weekend without points despite Norris leading the race on lap 1. A brutal result for the constructors' battle. Closing thoughts, Antonelli takes the championship by the throat. The biggest takeaway from Canada, Kimi Antonelli is no longer the future of Formula 1. He is the present. 4 straight wins, a 43-point championship lead, and another pressure-filled victory against his own teammates in equal machinery, but there's another story developing here too. George Russell versus Antonelli is becoming explosive. The respect is still there, but the frustration is building fast. And if Mercedes keeps producing this kind of pace, this title fight inside one garage could define the entire 2026 season. Top 5 Drivers' Championship after Canada. Kimi Antonelli with 131 points, George Russell with 88 points, Charles Leclerc with 75 points, Lewis Hamilton with 72 points, and Lando Norris with 58 points. Top 5 Constructors' Championship after Canada. Mercedes 219 points, Ferrari 147 points, McLaren 106 points, Red Bull 57 points and Alpine 35 points. And that wraps up an unforgettable weekend in Montreal. A weekend that everything, teammate battles, strategy chaos, changing weather, heartbreak, controversy and another statement victory from Kimi Antonelli. Mercedes officially look like the team to beat. The championship fight inside that garage is heating up fast. And the rest of the grid suddenly has a massive problem heading into Europe. Next up, Formula 1 heads to one of the most iconic races on the calendar, the Monaco Grand Prix, which kicks off the European leg of the 2026 season on the weekend of June 5th through 7th at the legendary Circuit de Monaco. That one is guaranteed to bring drama. Thanks for listening to the Pitwall Pod. Don't forget to follow and rate the podcast, and we'll catch you next time for more Formula 1 breakdowns, reactions, and race weekend chaos. Also, don't forget to follow our Instagram, Empowered Paddock, TikTok, Around the World in 24 Tracks, and our YouTube channel, Lights Out with Hannah. See you soon! Bye!